It's wonderful. Perfect. So again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dr. Kerry Magro. I'm a professional speaker. This has been a personal passion of mine. I actually wrote, as part of the interactive activity, a little bit about my journey in the chat box as well. I'm from Hoboken, New Jersey. I started professional speaking about 11 years ago. I have a very personal passion behind this cause. I was diagnosed with autism when I was 4 years old. I talked a little bit about this with ATTA when they had me previously talking about the ROI benefits of hiring autistic people in the workplace. So today we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into what reasonable accommodations look like. So we'll be talking about what reasonable accommodations actually really do look like in the workplace, what they don't look like in the workplace, and give you some key examples of some individuals who are currently employed today who are autistic and what they're currently receiving in terms of reasonable accommodations. Because I can't tell you how many groups I go to speak with, especially companies, when we talk about reasonable accommodations, they say something on the lines to me such as, oh, you mean like a ramp for somebody in a wheelchair? Well, yes, we are talking about that, but we are talking also about individuals with cognitive disabilities, the neurodiversity community. It's not only about reasonable accommodations for physical disabilities, but what we can be doing to put our best foot forward to help those in the disability world who have those cognitive disabilities. So this is a topic very near and dear to me because I also dealt with a lot of challenges with disclosure, especially when I was just starting off in the workforce for the first time about whether or not I would actually ask for reasonable accommodations in the workplace due to potential discrimination due to my disability, and a lot of companies looking at the bottom line and might not necessarily want to take a chance on somebody who's on the autism spectrum. So we'll talk a little bit about that in today's presentation as well. But to kick us off, I wanted to share just a quick video with all of you so you could get a little glimpse into what I'm currently doing today in the autism world, especially when it comes to this topic of employment. I hope you enjoy. I'm a professional speaker, so I work through a speaker bureau, and I've been doing it for about 8 years now. I was diagnosed with autism when I was 4, so it's a personal passion project for me. It's a labor of love. After years of not knowing what I kind of wanted to do with my future, I wanted to go out there and break down barriers for individuals who are impacted by a diagnosis. I want these kids to find their key interests, find their strengths, and then ideally find their village to ultimately help them utilize all those strengths to hopefully find meaningful employment. When the school bus stops coming after these kids age 21, it's very much deer in headlights. It's everything from where do I go to find supports, where do I go to find therapies, intervention, and then also how do I go about even disclosing my disability if I want to find a job and I want to get reasonable accommodations, or if I want to go to school and get reasonable accommodations in college. It's important that these kids self-advocate for themselves at a very, very early age so that when they do transition to adulthood, they'll ultimately be able to have a little bit of practice in these realms, because it's hard out there, especially for our adult population right now. How amazing it would be for just our society to understand that there are people out there doing incredible, incredible things. And maybe if we get to know them a little bit better, we can even help them advance even more. And I was severely impacted with autism when I was a kid, and my parents didn't know if I would ever speak. And what I tell so many kids today who are going through challenges, who are having those difficulties, is that we're learning so much more about autism disabilities every single day. I am so sorry. I am not sure. Stick to what you're good at, stick to your passions, and you could change the world, because I know so many kids who have turned into adults who are doing that right now. So that's just a little bit about my journey. And one of the key things that I really do as part of my work is I speak throughout K through university about diversity, equity, inclusion in addition to our companies. And one of the greatest things about my job is the opportunity to connect with young individuals, especially those who are transitioning to adulthood. Now, one of the staggering statistics that we really need to have a larger conversation about is the fact that the majority of autistic adults are unemployed or underemployed in the United States. We do a deep dive in our presentation about the ROI benefits about the statistics today, but 5.4 million autistic adults currently live in the United States. And the fact that up to 90% of them are unemployed or underemployed is really unfortunate when we as a society right now in 2022 have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the past 40 years. So we need to have larger conversations about how we can tap into this untapped talent pool, because people like myself, autistic people like me, just want a chance to succeed. So my background, so first and foremost, I started out talking about early access to care. So really the first 5 years when somebody was diagnosed with autism. But I realized as many of my peer mentees were reaching adulthood that, like I mentioned in the video, the school bus was stopping coming at the age of 21 for these individuals, and many of them did want to find meaningful employment opportunities. I'm happy to say that many of my mentees have found meaningful employment opportunities today, but that kind of led to me changing my career focus. I was really focused on digital marketing I went to Seton Hall University, receiving a bachelor's in digital marketing before deciding to change career paths and focus on the disability community. So now I get the wonderful opportunity to travel the globe, not only getting to speak with K through university, but getting to speak to small and large companies about diversity, equity, inclusion, primarily on neurodiversity in the workplace and what that looks like, tapping into that untapped talent pool. So we often give professional development trainings as part of Lunch and Learns, in addition to Work Matters summits, Days of Understanding, and also neurodiversity in the workforce panels, where we bring in autistic adults to share about their experiences finding employment in the hopes of encouraging companies to take a chance on some of the most talented people I know today in our society. It's given me the opportunity to work with great groups such as Wyndham Worldwide, PNC Bank, TD Bank, Citrix, American Express, the Toronto Raptors, and so many more incredible groups, including ATTA. But one of the reasons why I'm here with all of you today is because of my key interests growing up. Because of my autism diagnosis, I grew up with two extreme key interests. I wanted to grow up to be the next Larry Bird. I could tell you all 30 NBA teams and every single player on one of those teams. And I also wanted to be the sixth member of the Backstreet Boys. I fell in love with music. I fell in love with theater. And that actually helped me find my voice when I couldn't speak. Being able to have sounds for so many of my early years, I started finally speaking in complete sentences when I was about 7 years old, and realized that even though I can't sing for the life of me, I love karaoke though, theater was something that would help me tremendously build my social skills while also being able to get out of my box. Many individuals I work with have challenges with mind blindness and tunnel vision. So theater helped me by playing different characters, being able to understand other people's perspectives. And today, as a 34-year-old adult, I've had the opportunity to write 4 books based on my journey growing up on the autism spectrum, in addition to working with the entertainment industry as part of my consulting work today, to bring a realistic portrayal of autism and disability to our entertainment industry. As a thank you for ATTA having this out today, we're also going to be donating a signed copy of one of our latest books, For the Love of Autism, which I had the wonderful opportunity to write the foreword for their resource library to continue this topic of education about those with autism. And recently this year, we got the wonderful opportunity to consult on Love on the Spectrum, which is a Netflix series, which started out in Australia. had 2 seasons on Australia, and this year they had their first US season. We were able to win 3 Primetime Emmy Awards for the show in the US. It was really, really incredible. And as somebody who wrote a book on autism and love, it was one of my greatest honors to get the opportunity to consult on this show, simply because I know many individuals who are on the autism spectrum who have challenges trying to find love. And it can be very, very challenging at times. So being able to work on a show where we talk about that topic, trying to find love for those on the spectrum, was a real treat of mine. And now we are working on season 2, which will hopefully be out in late 2023. So in addition to my work, one of the things I truly realized, and I talked a little bit about that in the intro video, is the importance of self-advocacy. So when we talk about reasonable accommodations, one of the best ways of helping individuals really go about asking for those reasonable accommodations is starting early in the conversations about self-advocacy. And one way we do that is every single place I go to speak, I bring a tripod and a camera, and I sit down with self-advocates for 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and I ask them, what would you like the world to know about you? Many of them having their first opportunity via our work to have an on-camera interview. We hope to nurture self-advocacy in the hopes that whatever they decide to do in their futures, whether it's pursuing post-secondary, whether it's pursuing housing, or it's pursuing employment opportunities, they will feel a little bit more comfortable in their own skin sharing about those needs. So one individual we got to highlight has a very unique perspective of actually finding work in a car wash. And this is a little bit about his story that I wanted to share with all of you.
We're trying to apply for different jobs, and I realized that they just go to Google for his car wash there. I was like, I want to apply there because it's something I would like to do. So we applied, and I heard back for an interview, and then the manager wanted me to come back again, and I got the job.
Do you think more employers should hire people with autism?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because we're not as different as everybody else in the community. We're all the same, but we have, disability, but that can't stop us from wanting to get a job. I had a lot of difficulties trying to stay focused because they were going too fast for my pace, and I felt like I wasn't catching up as fast as they would.
He was diagnosed with Tourette's first. We knew that there was a strong possibility he would have Tourette's. My oldest daughter had Tourette's, and Ian is actually my grandson, but he's lived with me since
97
when he was 16 months old, and we adopted him. I would like him to have a job that utilizes the skills that he has and his interests, because with Ian, if he's interested in something, he's going to give 110%. So he has some areas that are definite interests, and the storm chasing is definitely one of them. He could tell you anything you need to know about tornadoes. He's watched probably every video available on those. And he has some other talents as well. He's liked car washes since he was very young, and fascinated with the way the brushes work. And he's done his own research on that.
Can you just snap? Oh, wow, that's good. I can't snap for some reason. It's a real problem. Awesome. You have a relationship, have a job, can snap like Michael Jackson. I mean, what else? And is there anything else that you would like people to know about your story at home?
Don't judge people this way that they have disabilities. Treat them like you would treat anyone else.
So I'm happy to say today that Ian is truly thriving. He has continued to maintain a job. And one of the things that we really just want to encourage via this video series, we've highlighted over 175 self-advocates. everyone from a 6-month-old with Down syndrome from the Bahamas all the way to an Army veteran with cerebral palsy who didn't disclose his diagnosis in the hopes of fighting for our country, that we get the opportunity to nurture this self-advocacy so they can potentially one day self-advocate for themselves in terms of reasonable accommodations. So in addition to that, as part of my speaking work, I also have a 501c3 nonprofit organization where we not only provide scholarships for autistic students to go to college, but we also provide small business grants for businesses that are hiring people with disabilities. We've had the wonderful opportunity to provide over 15 business grants in the past 2 years, knowing that challenges with small businesses, especially around COVID, was a real challenge for them. So just a housekeeping note before we go into a little bit of a deep dive into reasonable accommodations. I am an avid note taker during these presentations, whether I'm a panelist or I'm an attendee. So one of the things I'll let you know is not only did Kirsten provide a link to today's PowerPoint slides in the chat, but also I'll also be including a QR code at the end so you don't miss any one of the resources. We'll share about 40 key resources that you could utilize when we were talking about this topic of reasonable accommodations in the workplace today. So first off, what is a reasonable accommodation? Now, again, there's so many higher ups at companies, senior leaders who, when I talk about reasonable accommodations, it goes back to those with physical disabilities. And we have to do a better job of highlighting the fact that as per the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, a reasonable accommodation is truly defined as any change or adjustment to a job or work environment that permits a qualified applicant or employee with a disability to participate in the job application process, to perform the essential functions of a job, or to enjoy benefits and privileges of employment equal to those enjoyed by employees without disabilities. So one area and one group that is doing some incredible work when we're talking about reasonable accommodations and what that could look like for all disabilities as part of the disabilities that fall under the American with Disability Act is the Job Accommodation Network. Now, I would love in the chat box if you would tell me if you've ever heard of the Job Accommodation Network before, but they have a great video, which they did in collaboration with Disability Rights Washington, that explains a little bit more about what reasonable accommodations look like currently today in the workplace for those with disabilities.
Everyone needs the right tools to perform a job. Chairs for employees who work at desks, ladders for roofers who need to get on top of a house, even lunch breaks for people who need food to get through the day, you know, like we all do. It makes good business sense to have a workplace that accommodates everyone's needs. And laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and the Rehabilitation Act are there to make sure workers with disabilities are accommodated too. So what kind of accommodations are we talking about? Special privileges for special people, right? Gold-plated hover chairs, trained seeing eye uniforms. Not even close. Turns out employees with disabilities aren't particularly special, and neither are the accommodations they need to do their jobs. In fact, they're pretty reasonable. Literally, it's why the ADA calls them reasonable accommodations. An accommodation is any change in the environment or in the way things are done that enables an individual with a disability to enjoy equal opportunities to work. Miguel works as an office assistant, and his low vision makes using a computer monitor difficult. So his employer provided screen reading software that reads aloud on-screen text and image descriptions. That's a reasonable accommodation. June is a bookkeeper who experienced a traumatic brain injury. Concentrating for long periods of time is exhausting for her. So instead of taking one long break, her employer allows her to take several short breaks. That's a reasonable accommodation. And according to the Job Accommodation Network, JAN, the majority of workplace accommodations, 59% cost absolutely nothing. But if there is an expense, there are tax credits and other incentives out there to support businesses in creating a more accessible workplace.
So one of the great statistics that they throw out there is that the majority of reasonable accommodations cost absolutely nothing. And I'll add on that the fact that when they do cost something, it's typically just an onboarding fee on average of around $500. So again, when we talk about the bottom line of hiring people with disabilities in the workplace, statistics have indicated that, especially for those with autism are more likely to stay at a job longer. They're more likely to take less time off from work. And on average, the reasonable accommodations cost absolutely nothing. So it's not about
Everyone-
it's not about what a company can do for an autistic employee. It's what an autistic employee can do for that company. We need to change the conversation. So these are just some great examples of especially those with autism and what they currently face. These are just some great examples via the job accommodation network, such as if somebody is having a verbal communication deficit. Now, when we talk about autism is still defined and characterized as a social and communication disorder. However, when we talk about the autism world, it's important that we really utilize the fact that autism is a spectrum. And if you met one individual who's autistic, you've met just that one individual who's autistic. So this example is a person who works at a chemical company, has a verbal and communication deficit, though can communicate through handwriting and by email. So the employer wanted to provide accommodations during the first stage interview, which involved answering questions from a 3-person search committee, suggesting providing the questions in advance. So this is an important thing to realize about reasonable accommodations. It's not only when the individual is in the workplace, but it's also during the actual process of interviewing, the application process. There are reasonable accommodations that an individual can ask for before they're even going through the onboarding as a potential employee. Another great example is an autistic employee working for a large marketing firm. This is similar to my own personal experience as somebody who worked in digital marketing for 4 years in New York. Through knowledgeable in her field, she had difficulty participating in work activities with her team. Now, this is especially challenging for those on the autism spectrum when we're talking about soft skills, which some high schools in particular don't really do a good enough job, in my opinion, of really focusing on teamwork activities. And a lot of that is because of extracurriculars not really focusing on social skills. When we have extracurriculars in our high schools that are focused on social skill training, it can really definitely benefit when we're talking about those soft skills when it comes to team play in the potential workplace. So as a part of her accommodations, suggested job restructuring, and which we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation as well, which allowed her to work independently while providing information to her team electronically. This gave the employee the distance she needed to be comfortable, yet also provide the team with information needed to forward with marketing campaigns. And the last example is an autistic scientist. So have the inability to speak. Now, one of the things that you should know, especially in the autism community, is 40% of autistic children are completely non-speaking. But what I will say is, and we shared this in one of the videos in our previous presentation, we had an 18-year-old named Justice who is non-speaking, who uses a tap-to-talk device and has a job today in a coffee shop. Some of the most brilliant minds I know in the autism community are those who are non-speaking. There are individuals such as Carly Fleischman, who is a young woman from Toronto who's on the autism spectrum, who wrote a New York Times bestselling book and is still non-speaking today and communicates via her computer and her iPad. So for this example, she was preparing to present her research at a conference, and she pre-recorded audio to go with her slides and brought a tablet with a speech generation app with her in case she needed it during the question and answer period. Now, this is really, really helpful, especially for comorbidities and other dual diagnoses that sometimes accompany an autism diagnosis, such as apraxia, ecophilia, and other types of disorders such as selective mutism, speech communication disorders. Other individuals can utilize this as a reasonable accommodation as well. So what else could it look like? One of the areas that we really try to do a better job with when we're consulting for human resource departments, especially, is adjusting the work schedule. If an autistic employee has to attend any form of therapy due to their disability, it is a myth that autistic people grow out of having an autism diagnosis once they reach adulthood. One of the typical things I receive as an autistic adult today is, Kerry, you have autism. How are you able to be cured of your autism? I'm going to have autism every single day for the rest of my life. Autism is a lifelong disorder. And what some companies don't realize is that those in adulthood still deal with some form of therapy, whether it's sensory related, having to go to an occupational therapist, to physical therapy, to even speech therapy at times as well. So adjusting work schedules is really, really important for human resource departments and supervisors to consider. Different job requirements. We'll talk a little bit about this later as well, but it's important for companies to realize that as long as they don't have to alter the entire job completely, there are some job requirements that might be able to be moved to other employees or adjusted for that specific position, while not taking away the main responsibilities of that specific job. And when we talk about the hiring process, again, accommodations don't just start once somebody gets the job. It's truly important to understand that it is a journey from that initial interview process, that one-day job trial that somebody might look like. It definitely is a full journey when we talk about the reasonable accommodations. Now, this is really, really important that we discuss because there is a lot of talk about what reasonable accommodations don't look like. Now, undue hardship is it's called the undue hardship exception, and it focuses on any undue hardship that would be difficult or expensive to implement within that company. So in addition to that, eliminating main job functions as part of that position, an excuse for lower productivity requirements. Now, this is debated in many companies that we work with. Some companies have productivity requirements as part of that job, but as part of a reasonable accommodation, for example, for those who might be speech impaired, who might have challenges being non-speaking, it might be really, really challenging for them to maintain those productivity requirements. So some companies definitely have thought about altering those productivity requirements and really focusing on doing weekly check-ins, if not daily check-ins, with their employees to make sure that they are reaching their objectives and seeing how much time it takes them based on their specific talents that they bring to that position. In addition to that, creating a new position entirely. Reasonable accommodations are about potentially altering some of the job requirements, but not creating a brand new position. And a need to purchase the highest quality accommodation. Sometimes when we talk with supervisors, a employee will recommend a reasonable accommodation that the company purchase for that individual when it might be the highest quality, as long as it's fulfilling that specific requirement as part of a reasonable accommodation has to be considered. And when we talk about disclosure, I mean, this is what is one of the biggest challenges when we talk about reasonable accommodations. Some individuals feel like they are using their disability as a crutch, and it's giving them a leg up compared to their coworkers. And what we work with a lot of young, especially young autistic adults is understanding that it's just helping level the playing field. And that's a really important when we talk about self-advocacy and we talk about neurodiversity, it's really important that we discuss that disclosure, even though it might be challenging at times, especially if you actually do need a reasonable accommodation. It's really, really important to have those conversations. So each autistic individual should ask themselves, does my autism affect my job performance in any way that accommodations are needed? So during my own journey, I received a note taker in the workplace when I was working specifically for 2 internships in a marketing firm before going into full-time professional speaking. So I had a note taker, and in addition to that, I had all my job requirements written down versus verbally told to me. And this just helped me process information better, especially as somebody who had challenges with auditory learning. So in school, many of us may have heard of these terms of visual learners, auditory learners, and kinetic learners. So I had a deficit in auditory learning due to my autism diagnosis. So I would have somebody who would write tasks down for me on paper so I could fulfill those job requirements. Assessing your challenges and strengths, pros and con list, I definitely recommend for all of my mentees who are currently pursuing employment opportunities. And what I ask them to think about when they start those conversations is things such as, did I receive accommodations in high school, and what did that look like? What did my child study team tell me about when I was in high school, especially about my strengths and challenges as well? In addition to that, if they received any post-secondary training as well, as part of 504 reasonable accommodations, what did they receive as part of their disability support service that might potentially be mirrored in a specific workplace? In addition to that, does the job I'm currently looking at have a history or testimonials of people discussing reasonable accommodations? Many of my mentees I work with, I ask them to go to websites such as Glassdoor.com and Monster.com and read testimonials from individuals who have currently been in that workplace, doing a search on those websites for keywords such as disability, autism, autistic, and seeing what pops up and seeing if anyone has positive testimonials of working with that company, and potentially if there anyone who mentions the reasonable accommodations they received. In addition to that, I also recommend to my mentees that they look at websites like the Disability Equality Index, which monitors which companies actually are doing their utmost when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, best practices around those with disabilities. In addition to that, we have a little bit of a crisis going on in some of our companies today when we're talking about individuals who self-diagnose. Self-diagnosis has become a huge area, especially for adults, primarily because it is much harder to receive an adult diagnosis, not only of autism, but a wide range of disabilities. So we've seen some individuals go into companies and the companies asking them for their medical information to receive reasonable accommodations, and then actually having the challenge of telling that employer that they are self-diagnosed versus a formal diagnosis, which does not give them the opportunity to receive those reasonable accommodations. So one recommendation I give to companies today to help them understand this topic of reasonable accommodations in larger detail is considering an onboarding course as part of their workplace, especially within those first 3 months where individuals learn more about diversity, equity, inclusion, best practices, and having a part of that course focus on disability etiquette. This helps not only with the idea of helping just build a better understanding and acceptance of those with disabilities, but it also helps with potential autistic employees feeling more comfortable about disclosing their diagnosis in the hopes of receiving reasonable accommodations that could help them better perform in the workplace. Some of that disability etiquette can be around topics such as identity first language versus person first language, and the whole neurodiversity movement, where many of us in school were always told to put the person before their disability. But especially in the autism and deaf communities today in 2022, many individuals feel validation being called an autistic person versus a person with autism, or a deaf person versus a person who is deaf. This also may help autistic employees with things like their own self-advocacy. And in addition to that, potentially considering bringing in guest speakers during the months of April, which is Autism Acceptance Month, and in addition, October, which is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, to address these issues and topics in more detail as well. And considering including employees who currently are at your companies who have a disability, to encourage them to share their stories to help with understanding and rapport among their teams internally. So how an autistic employee may ask for a reasonable accommodation. These are the two most frequent ways I see, verbally or in writing to a supervisor or their HR department, or an autistic employee may just go simply to their HR department if their supervisor initially denies their request. I have not seen many supervisors deny a request, especially if that accommodation is truly by definition reasonable. It's important for them to say why the reasonable accommodation is needed as well. It's important that this is part of an ongoing conversation, that the dialogue is interactive in nature, because that will be a helpful way of actually deciding whether or not that accommodation is needed, or if that accommodation currently already exists for all employees at the company. For example, some accommodations in the workplace are focused on sensory. Now, there are companies that have, for example, dimmers for individuals who might just have challenges with bright lights. Now, I know many individuals who don't have autism who have challenges in the workplace with fluorescent lights. So companies today, like the Googles of the world and many Fortune 500 companies, for example, have dimmers in their companies because they know that of the challenges of bright lights for those individuals. So it's important to have those interactive dialogues with a supervisor or HR, because some of the reasonable accommodations that they may be asking for might currently exist. So we talked a little bit about this in the ROI benefits of hiring autistic people in the workplace webinar, which you can all check out, that we previously did with ATTA. But I wanted to do a little refresher simply because of the idea of giving you a better look of what these reasonable accommodations may look like. So these are the most 4 frequent areas I see when we talk about reasonable accommodations for those with autism. It's either sensory, environmental, communication related, or social. So one of the things to consider, and this is the most frequent one, is sensory related challenges. Now, when we talk about sensory challenges, we're talking about individuals primarily who have either hypersensitivity, so they'll feel a lot of sensory sensations when it comes to the 5 senses, or they'll have very low sensitivity where they might have high pain thresholds, where especially if they're doing manual labor and physical labor, it might be very, very challenging for them to understand different levels of pain. So when we talk about these sensory issues, so it's really important that we consider all 5 senses. When we also talk about that, one of the areas that I see most frequently is light sensitivity. So that is why some companies consider dimmers, providing sunglasses or caps within those workplaces as a reasonable accommodation, or moving their cubicle or office to a place in the workplace that is less bright. Smell sensitivity has been coming up a lot in the companies I work with, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, because many of our custodial teams are very focused on making sure that our work environments are very, very clean. So, for example, avoiding cleaning products with fragrances for individuals who might have smell sensitivity. Other considerations when we talk about reasonable accommodations, noise sensitivity. This can be frequent, especially for companies that are big in nature, having white noise machines, earbuds, noise canceling headphones, and allowing IT to allow neurodiverse workers to have music services on their company computers and not having them go through them being blocked via firewall because they think that that would hinder their work productivity, having the music system on their computer. Taste sensitivity as well, being able to provide gluten-free and organic options doesn't make sense for those with autism, but it just makes sense for everyone. In addition to touch sensitivity, do your companies focus primarily on dress codes? Does a individual have to have formal attire on at all times? Do they have to wear a tie every day? Do they have to wear button-down clothes? This is all conversations that are sometimes challenging for those with autism, especially when they might have physical challenges that may be associated with their autism diagnosis. When we talk about social, I mentioned this earlier, but it's really important that we have weekly check-ins with supervisors. This is just a great reasonable accommodation that just makes sense for everyone, especially making sure that they understand also things such as appropriate and inappropriate behaviors in the workplace, especially for those with autism who might have challenges with mind blindness and tunnel vision. And then also, in addition to that, when we talk about the onboarding process, I think it just makes sense that more companies, when we talk about their human resource departments, provide actual video, online training videos around topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion to provide scenarios that are okay and not okay in the workplace. Many companies do this today for sexual harassment training. But when we talk about disability and diversity, equity, and inclusion, it just makes sense. And then when we talk about environmental, I see more companies today providing a quiet room or a sensory area for individuals who might have challenges with being overwhelmed in certain situations that might be intimidating to them, especially around the sensory end, but also just feeling overwhelmed in their workplace environment altogether. Also, other things to consider when we talk about communication, some companies may provide recorders, text to speech devices to review assignments and meetings. Communication supports for those who are non-speaking and minimally verbal. These can look at low assistive technologies such as picture exchange communication systems, to communication boards, to Tobii light writers, some individuals providing iPads or other forms of technology as part of tablet fires to help these individuals communicate with others in the workplace. In addition to that, some individuals, this is a great case study that I was looking at just a few years ago about an individual who wrote in a workplace that I'm autistic. I prefer direct, literal, and detailed communication. If I'm not making eye contact, not greeting you back, not understanding, there is no malicious intent. Thank you for understanding. So I love this idea, not only for somebody to get the opportunity to understand a little bit more about who they work with, but also just from the building of autism acceptance and understanding as well. Could definitely be something that would be great just to build on diversity overall. So additional considerations that I would love to see more of in our companies include things such as on-site job coaching and peer mentoring, visual timers to stay on task, tasks that are observable and measurable. And now this is really, really important just when we talk about those weekly check-ins with supervisors, having the opportunity to have things that are observable and measurable. When we look at productivity requirements, we're talking more about the measurable, such as you have to do 300 phone calls in a week. These are more measurable versus observable. Now, these are just really, really helpful, though, for just companies to really keep in mind when they're thinking about short-term and long-term goals as well for their employees. In addition to that, quarterly professional development opportunities for coworkers to understand the reasonable accommodations those who are neurodiverse may face. So we get the opportunity to be part of keynote, breakout sessions, lunch and learns, coffee and chats, work matters summits, days of understandings with companies who just want their employees to understand a little bit more about individuals who might be a little different than them. And in addition to that, another consideration for those who want to learn more about what these reasonable accommodations look like, in addition to the Job Accommodation Network, I would also definitely highly recommend checking out the Department of Labor's Office of Disability and Employment Policy, Business Strategies That Work, a framework for disability inclusion. This is available on the Department of Labor's website. If you just go to dol.gov, you can learn a little bit more about how you can get a hold of that PDF. It's about 18 pages, but it has valuable information when we talk about reasonable accommodations and what they look like. And then for additional reading on this topic, there are some incredible resources out there currently available for our community to take advantage of. The first one I love is the Autism Speaks Employment Toolkit. This is a 65-page PDF that focuses on everything from disclosure, self-advocacy, what reasonable accommodations currently look like, how to utilize your strengths from an early age, how you can start the transition to adulthood when a student is in school. When we talk about things such as transition period for those in high school, as part of their individualized education plan, they should receive some form of transitional training to help them once they get to adulthood, starting at the age of 14 in some states, but most states 16, to help them with the idea of potentially looking at employment one day. The other great thing about this toolkit is that it's absolutely free. They have a website called the spectrumcareers.com, which focuses primarily on a job portal that has certain jobs that are currently available out there today for those who are on the autism spectrum. We've talked about them already, but Job Accommodation Network has been one of the key organizations that have really focused on this. When you go to their website, they have some, which is just jan.org. They have a database of every single disability and what reasonable accommodations may look like for each one of that, including examples. HireAutism.org has some great and valuable information, just if you're in the process of trying to help somebody who's autistic finding employment opportunities, especially on the college level. Microsoft's Neurodiversity Career Connector is just a great onboarding program. They focus primarily on job training. They started a pilot program several years ago specifically for those with autism, with the idea that giving them the right training can lead to future opportunities in Microsoft to really succeed. And we're seeing more companies that are doing that, such as the S&Ps of the world. S&P does a biannual event called Autism at Work, and it's really popular within our autism community. Mentra is a neurodiversity employment network that has connected billions of individuals within our community who are neurodiverse with potential job opportunities. And this is actually a program that was started via the First Center. This was an initiative that was done by Vanderbilt University, and they're a great group of people, especially if you're trying to learn a little bit more about how you in your specific jobs currently can focus on being a little bit more neurodiverse friendly. And then finally, what Can You Do campaign. One of their key partners is RJ Mitty. RJ Mitty rose to fame being the actor who played a character with cerebral palsy on the show Breaking Bad. He was Walter White's son. And RJ Mitty has become a pioneer in our disability community, focused on what you can do. Often in our schools today, we focus 99.9% of our time on what our kids can't do, but what are we doing to nurture their strengths? And that's primarily what the What Can You Do campaign really focuses on. And on their website, they have information when it focuses on employment for all those with disabilities. So finally, I never expected this to be my life. I was always the kid who was told what he wouldn't be able to do. And growing up, not realizing that I even had an autism diagnosis till I was 11 and a half, it was a really hard challenge to go into being comfortable in my own skin. And then later on, going about the process of asking for reasonable accommodations. So what I like to tell people today is that when we start early on, having earlier conversations with our loved ones about their diagnoses, and then we help them understand what reasonable accommodations can look like before they're going into those situations in potential work opportunities, they will be far better off. So I like to say that autism can't define me, and I define autism. And I can only hope, regardless of any one of your journeys currently out there today, can go out there, define your lives and your journeys in the way that you best see it every single day. And if you need any help getting started in those conversations, these are the ways that you can stay in contact with me after today's presentation. And I thank you all so much for taking a few minutes out of your day today to be with us about this really important topic. And I would love to answer any questions that any of you have at this time. You can feel free to go to the Q&A box and type your question in there. And we allotted, I typically allot the last 15 to 30 minutes for any questions that you have. So feel free to write them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time allotted. And again, for the resources, in addition to the PowerPoint slide notes, feel free to scan this QR code with your cell phone or follow the link bit.ly/free autism resources. Thank you all so much again for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kerry. So we're going to give everyone a second to ask any questions, or a couple minutes now, ask any questions. But while you all are thinking of your questions and typing them out, as Kerry said, feel free to use the Q&A or even the chat, and I can help monitor that. I just want to reiterate some housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded. Today's recording and the PowerPoint slides from Kerry will be on our website. And you can download the PowerPoint slides and get that URL that Kerry has up now on the screen for free autism resources. And then your follow-up email will be in your email tomorrow. It'll be from ICSPS Zoom will be the sender. And it will have the link to our website where you can find the recording in the slide deck, as well as a follow-up survey. I'm going to go ahead and put the follow-up survey in the chat right now if you would like to take it while the session is fresh in your mind. Feel free to do so. So that follow-up survey is in the chat now. And I think that's all the housekeeping items I have.
Awesome. Amal, thank you so much for writing that comment. In addition, somebody wrote that Jennifer writes that she utilizes Jen all the time. Used to be a vocal rehab counselor. That's awesome. I'm glad it was helpful, Jennifer. It's definitely one of the resources I use most frequently. Any other thoughts, questions? Maureen writes, thank you. I learned so much. I work with young adults ages 18 to 24. Yeah, Maureen, I have to say, as part of my mentoring work, I primarily, as part of my nonprofit, work with individuals from the ages of 16 to 24. So really focus on that transition to adulthood age, and post-secondary is definitely an area that we kind of specialize on, but we're seeing several individuals, just due to inflation, especially in 2022, forego the post-secondary process and going into employment right away, just due to the staggering cost of some universities when it comes to the amount of money it costs each year. Amal writes, Amal wrote in the Q&A box, so the new term to describe autistic people is a person with autism. I do not want to offend anyone. So Amal, so I feel like many of us probably, and if you like to write in the chat and let me know this too, when we were all growing up, I felt like the majority of us were told by our teachers and our faculty members to always put a person before their actual disability. And now there has been an ongoing movement, which has been happening for almost 2 decades now, that's been focused on identity first language. Identity first language is one of the more dominated by self-advocates, so autistic individuals, where we like to be called autistic individuals because we consider autism as part of an integral part of who we are as individuals, while also recognizing that it is a spectrum and that some individuals are going to need 24/7 care and might not be able to advocate for themselves. Maureen writes, I would like to have a conversation at some time. That's great, Maureen. Yeah, definitely feel free to stay in touch. Again, everyone, feel free if there are any specific questions that you had that you want to hash out via email, feel free to shoot me an email anytime, in addition to connecting on social media, in addition to any other the resources as well. If you do go for the link in the QR code, I also consider testimonials the greatest compliment. If you learned something new from this presentation, I will just love to hear your feedback as well. So Lucas wrote, Yeoman's work, bravo. Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate that comment in the chat. And as I just scroll up in the chat box, it's so great to see so many of you just and your current work experience with the autism community. Ali is tuning in with us from the Arrow Special Education Cooperative, and she's currently a job coach and grant manager. You know, it's funny, Ali, we were just in we were just in California recently. We were giving a keynote about supportive employment opportunities, and we were working with a wide range of job coaches and grant managers. And what you do is very, very valuable for our community. I commend you as somebody who grew up with a family of grant writers and city planners. And as somebody who just filled out a grant for appropriation funding to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. What you're doing is truly important. We have any other thoughts, questions?
I don't see any other ones, Carrie. We can definitely end early if nobody has any other questions.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all so much. I hope this was valuable, and definitely stay in touch. It definitely takes a village. And thank you again to ATDA for having me out.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. We always welcome you back. And again, this session is recorded, so feel free to send the recording or check out Carrie's other session that he did for us on the return on investment for hiring autistic people. That is also on our website as well. So check out those resources, send them to your coworkers who you think would benefit from this session. And we look forward to our next ADA webinar in January. It will be on January 10th, I believe, and we will be joined by Hallie Moss. And you can actually register for that session if you are not registered already. Right here, it's going to be on January 10th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to be talking about talking the talk about neurodiversity, sharing, advocating, and telling. And then I will put the link to register for that webinar in January if you're interested in the chat now to everybody. So go ahead and register, and we look forward to seeing everybody in January. Have a happy holiday season for everyone. Stay safe, stay warm, stay healthy.
Thanks all. Happy holidays.